Figure painting is hard, and caution can lead to flat, boring, and honestly ugly models, like this one. However, the road to success is surprisingly simple. Today, I'm going to walk you through all the steps it takes to build, paint, base, and shade a mini. So, without further ado, welcome to Figure Painting 101. Now, in building a mini, it's really simple. All you need to do is make sure that all of the mold lines are clean and that the parts fit together well. Don't sweat too much since these are super small figures and anything you miss isn't really going to be noticed, especially once you paint it. If you're really worried about it, you can always fill the gaps between arms and legs with a little bit of putty, but I don't usually do that because it's just a waste of time in my opinion. Now, when you're building it, make sure not to glue anything that would obstruct another part of the mini's body. So if it's holding a gun across its chest, make sure not to add the arms until the very end. After you painted everything else, it's going to give you a much better and more cohesive looking mini. In this case, the mini's arms aren't really covering anything too important, so I put them in. After it's all glued together, we obviously have painting. Now, I like to start with a airbrush coat, and this can be any color you have lying around. I like to use a gray or white maybe. A white can leave a chalky look, so usually just something that sprays to a nice smooth finish like this gray I'm using here is really going to make your mini look good. Basically, just make sure that the paint adheres to the mini while you're using a brush. Otherwise, you're going to have to put on a lot more layers, and it's not going to look quite as good. If you don't have an airbrush, you can always use spray can primer. I would recommend Tamiya's. The look of a figure's face really makes or breaks a model, so you want to make sure to do this right. I recommend using at least 4 tones of paint, although I have about 6 or 7, I believe I actually have 9 different skin tones, and actually rust. Rust looks really good as a deep base tone lying around, so I can make different looking faces because some people are more tan, some people are more white. It's just how it works. But to give you guys an idea of what I'm doing here, I'm putting down a very just an overall dark tone. This is going to be our shadow coat. And to get you an idea of what it looks like, I'm using brown rose and light rust kind of mixed together. After that, I lightened it up with some more brown rose and used that to cover any areas that I wanted highlighted later, but perhaps didn't want super highlighted. This was basically like a mid-tone. And this let me cover over most of the brown rose and light rust color and started the highlighting process. Basically what you want to do for highlights is avoid any place that might be in shadow if light is coming from the top, from above your face. So under your eyebrows, in your eye sockets, that's going to be super dark. Under your chin, super dark. But on your nose, on your cheekbones, that's going to be super bright. And so basically I'm just trying to draw that with the paint. Here I'm adding a little bit more highlight on the cheekbones because that's where it's going to draw a lot of light. I like to bring each highlight in a little bit lighter than the last one and in a little bit of a smaller place. So usually I try to bring a gradient of dark to light up the cheek to the collarbone, and then a gradient from dark to light from the temple to the point of their collarbone. This helps get really natural looking highlights in there. And then after that, I like to put a glaze of the darkest tone on over everything else. Now, it doesn't look like this in the end, trust me. You want to put it on so that it covers everything, and then take a little bit of water and clean off the excess. This is going to leave it in just the cracks and details of the finger, it actually works sort of like a wash, if you want to think about it that way. Now, eyes are probably the hardest detail to get right on a Mini. If you do too bright of a color, the white overpowers the rest of the face and draws your eyes only to the eyes and how big and round and white and scared they look. If you really want to do it right, you want to do a neutral gray color for the eye white, and then a dark brown for the pupil. And I'm using a Wargamer Insane Detail brush here. Just make sure you're working nice and slow, and be patient, because otherwise it's just not gonna look good. After you're done, you can always touch it up with a little bit of the mid-tone. Then painting his facial hair, I wanted to have him have a blonde beard. So I painted it with a kind of a khaki-ish color at first, and then I went in with a highlight afterwards. Now we can start on the actual clothes. Now, I like to start with the smallest detail, or relatively smallest. You can tell I didn't do the bandolier first, but you can see that I did the shirt first. I like to do that in a nice light color. Then I'm going to do the overcoat, and I want this unit to be a brown color for the overcoat. For the other unit, I'll probably do a green. And I like to do each unit a little bit differently, just for identification purposes. I think it makes it look more unique. But other than that, I'm just trying to get a good color palette for the figure himself. And I like to do this on one figure and then go back through and do it on the rest. This makes the unit look cohesive and allows for a little bit of creativity and unique personal gear, such as the undershirt. I don't think they all had the same color undershirt, so I'll probably be doing different colors there. But usually I like to go with a light color for the undershirt and a darker color for the overcoat. As you can see, I am painting it on in thin coats and then doing a second layer. When I'm painting at all, I use acrylic drying retarder from AK. This makes the paint flow better, it makes it go on easier, and you actually save your brushes because they don't get damaged when the paint dries in them, because it takes about an hour and a half to paint them. Now I'm just using different colors here. It's not super important which colors I'm using, but I'm trying to create a little bit of a gradient here with the lighter colors and then moving down to the darker boots. Now, as you can see, I'm not really painting in any specific order, but usually I like to do the undershirt, overcoat, pants, boots, then the smaller details of the uniform like the bandolier and binoculars, and then move on to the helmet afterwards. For this color here, for white, it's really hard to get a good coat of white with a brush. So make sure that you do it in thin coats and work it up to the brightness you want. I'm using Vallejo Ivory here with plenty of drying retarder in it. Then I'll do some metallic highlights at the for very last. This is usually something I save for the last bit because I find that it's easier to put them over other paint instead of painting around them. For the goggles, I wanted to add some depth, and so I first painted them orange and left them like this for the base coat. We're going to do some more with it and make them look a lot better and look like you can actually see through them. But right now, just a base coat and then a touch up with white is going to make them look alright. If you wanted to leave it like that, it's totally fine. Then I chose brown for the armored ring around his helmet, and then a khaki-ish color for the cloth part. And you can always look online for different rebel infantry to really get an idea of what you want here. Now, I lost all of my footage for the gun, painting the gun, and I need to go back and see if I can record that in a later video, but basically I like to base coat it a flat black and then dry brush it gunmetal. And that's it. It makes it look really good. Now the specific colors I'm using don't matter as much as, well, a ton of acrylic drying retarder, and make sure that you have a common base tone in it. As you can see with this officer, I'm using a lot of browns, and this helps tie the whole figure together and make it look like it's maybe for a certain environment. Now, if you're stuck, always look online. They'll have good examples that you can use in your own models, and they'll look great. Just make sure that you think about every part you're painting and what color it might be in real life. Now we're going to move on to basing the model, and this is basically, no pun intended, adding rocks and gravel to the base that the mini sits on. Now I like to do it this way, you guys can do it any way you want, but basically apply PVA glue to the bottom. Then you're going to want to shake sand or gravel or dirt, this is dirt I just sifted in my backyard, over the entire model like so. Then blow off anything excess that doesn't stick, and you'll get a nice continuous result. Then I take some larger gravel and a little bit of wood pieces that I have from a old potting soil box, and I want to just make sure that it looks natural, like he's walking through some dead leaves or dead sticks, stuff like that. Then I want to add some ground foam to add a little bit of life to the bottom of the base. And then I'm going to fix it all down with VMS sand and gravel fixer. Now you can do this all with PVA, but sand and gravel fixer doesn't leave any residue, and it's really, really easy to use. So I highly recommend it. If you do buy it from VMS, make sure to email them and tell them that I sent you. Once the base has dried for 24 hours, I give it a coat of Tamiya flat earth from my airbrush. You can do this with a brush, just make sure to work slowly and make sure that the base is completely dry before you start, otherwise you'll brush stuff off. But this gives us a nice coat, a solid coat to begin with. And I don't mind getting his feet because it make them look muddy and like he was in that environment. Then I paint some individual rocks different colors like gray and tan, and finish it off by painting the little ground foam as bushes. Now this is a little hard to make look accurate, but you do your best. And then also the twigs and sticks. This makes it look like a really interesting model. Now we want to add some basic highlights and shadows to the model. This makes it look alive. So to start, I want to add a slightly lighter color of the original color to each part in the exposed areas. So I'm doing the top of the folds of this cloak, as you can see here. Now this is a very subtle change, but you want to just make sure that you get it down, because this is going to slowly create a gradient that you can work with. No, I'm actually not paying much attention to what the light would hit, but rather what's the most exposed folds of the cloak. So I'm painting it on the furthest parts of the cloak, but not the inner folds. This gives it a sense of depth and realism that you can't really achieve by just doing zenithal highlights, which is basically just from the top, whatever is exposed, and you don't worry about anything else. From there, we can add some really high highlights. Now, these you need acrylic drying retarder for, because it makes the acrylic paint dry slower and gives you a smoother transition. Now you want to lighten that color even further and add it just to the edges of the highlighted areas that we've done before. So this is basically the highlight of the highlight that goes on the very outmost edges. As you can see, I'm only using it sparingly and blending it in as well as I can. Make sure to use drying retarder because this makes it actually possible. But as you can see, it makes a nice gradient that really makes the model pop. My process is the same for each color that we have here. So for the yellow, it's a slightly lighter yellow, and then a slightly lighter than that yellow, and a slightly lighter even than that yellow. If you're brave, you can do a lot of highlighting, and I'm pretty sure it'll look really nice. Plasmo's pretty reckless with his highlighting, and it looks, as most of you probably know, fantastic. Make sure to blend it in and leave no splotchy areas. And as you can see for the pants, it's the same process. Just putting it in the exposed areas and then blending it to make sure it fits in with the rest of the pants. If you do leave a little bit of a hard edge in some places, it actually doesn't matter that much. It blends right in and you don't notice unless you're looking for it. And if you're not doing this for a contest, I'm sure that you'll be fine with it. And you'll love the way it looks anyways. To put what I've been blabbering about in a nutshell, it's basically taking a lighter and lighter color and putting it in a smaller and smaller area to create a gradient that looks like light or even wear on the pants or any part of the clothing you want to do. And this works for really any part of the model. You can use, mini, sorry, I'm used to tanks, but you can use it on the gun, you can use it on the macro binoculars, you can use it on the helmet, whatever. It looks like wear or light, it looks amazing, and this step is 100% required to make a good looking model. Also, if you don't care about a mini too much, make sure to experiment on that one first and get a feel for shading and adding shadows on that one before you attempt it on one that you really want to look good. Also, if you don't have the drying retarder, get it now. You won't regret it. For the metallic parts, I actually decided to do a bit of a highlight there as well, and I did it in the same way, where the upper surfaces received the highlight. Now this is super subtle on a metallic part, but basically I took a silver color, which was lighter than the gunmetal that I'd used before, and just put it on an exposed area. This made it actually look really nice and pop really well. I also dry brushed it onto the gun, and this added just a little bit more character to the model. After that, you can finally start finishing up the final details, like for example the small details on the macro binoculars here. Now to add some nice glossy effects for the goggles and the macro binoculars, I used some Elmer's clear glue. Now, if you use the normal school glue, it dries matte, but if you use the clear school glue, it dries super glossy and looks fantastic. Now to finally finish off the face, I made a glaze out of Vallejo Intermediate Blue, that's right, blue, and gently washed it over his cheeks. This adds a incredible 5 o'clock shadow effect that looks like stubble once it dries. It doesn't look like it now, but trust me, once it dries, it looks fantastic. Now I finally made a very fine streak of gray and white through the goggles. Now this doesn't look like much, but from a distance it looks like the sun is glinting off of them and actually adds just a little bit of character to them. It's a really subtle little technique, but I think it goes a long way if your character has any type of glass or plastic shiny part. And to finish off the base, I painted the sides with flat black. This makes it look a lot more professional in my opinion, but it's a matter of preference. You guys could paint it whatever color you want. If you want to denote units with it, I prefer to denote my units with their uniforms, but that's 100% up to you. Now we're going to finally apply a dark shadow wash. Now this is a custom mix I made out of oil paints, and I prefer to use an oil paint wash because it's easier to clean up and it doesn't dry permanently for several weeks. So I slap it on into cracks and crevices, and then once I feel like I've gotten every detail highlighted, I'll just wash it away with some with some oil paint thinner. Now, I know that there are acrylic washes out there. If you guys want to use them, that's totally up to you, but I find that it's much easier to use a oil paint because it looks a lot better and you can have a lot more control with it. But all there is to it is to let capillary action take the wash into all the cracks and crevices of the model and make them look even more shadowed than before. I also like to run a little bit into the ground texturing that we did earlier, just to make it look a bit more varied and interesting in that respect. Just make sure to only apply it in some little areas and not over the whole ground texture, because it'll look too uniform and that's not what we're going for with this technique. Then it's just a matter of cleaning off the wash from the areas that you don't want it, such as the exposed parts that you've already highlighted and obviously don't want a shadow in. So take some oil paint thinner or water if you're using an acrylic wash, and wash it and brush it over the areas that you don't want it, and the wash should come right off. This is the benefit to an oil paint wash. Make sure not to wash it out of areas that you want the shadow coat to stay in. So here I'm being very careful around the folds of the cloak because I want to keep it in the folds, but not on the actual billows of the cloak. This technique, like everything else that modeling is, takes practice and may take a couple tries before you get the results you want. The nice thing about an oil wash is you can do it over and over again until you get the right results. With an acrylic wash, basically it's one and done. The nice thing about an oil paint wash is you can choose the amount and where you want the wash to be. So for the top of the helmet here, I don't want a ton of wash because it's going to be the lightest and the highest part of the model, so it shouldn't be too dirty. For the macro binoculars there, I don't want them to look super dirty because they're white and so it would look kind of bad, so I wanted to clean off most of the wash from that area. For the rest of the model though, I was able to be a little bit lighter on the cleanup and make some really nice dramatic shadows. And with the wash successfully applied, we're done. I hope you are as happy with your completed mini as I am with mine. And if you enjoyed the video, please let me know by dropping a like down below and subscribing for more content like this. Also, make sure to leave a comment, and if you want to join the fantastic people who make up my Patreon page, make sure to check out the link in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching, and may the acrylic drying retarder be with you always.